Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. My name is Drew. If you're your first time here, a big welcome. In this channel, we are studying, learning, exploring functional movement anatomy, which basically means we look at where the muscles go on the body and when they contract, how they pull on the bones, on the skeletal structure, and then how they create movement. So that's functional movement. When you're learning anatomy, it can be really super overwhelming. So what we do is you take it one piece at a time, one muscle at a time, get a good appreciation of that muscle, what it does on its own, and then with surrounding muscles and then what we call co-contracting muscles. So when muscles contract together, and they create movement. So you slowly build out a picture. So there's no real quick way of learning anatomy. You really do need to spend the time just to take them one muscle at a time to understand it. And today we are looking at the scalenes, these group of muscles here in the neck. Really important group of muscles for reasons you'll see as we go into the anatomy. And as always, we are using the app 3D for Medical. So I'm just going to be showing you a small part of what you can do with 3D for Medical. There'll be a link in the description below. The description is, if you're studying anatomy, if you're in kind of allied health, you're a physio, exercise physiologist, you're a personal trainer, massage therapist, body worker, if you're in fitness, yoga teacher, Pilates instructor, anything where you're trying to learn movement, okay, complete anatomy is a really good tool to help you learn that. So I find it very valuable when I teach. So hopefully you can too, particularly if you can't get into an actual anatomy lab and like get hands on cadavers. Like they're starting to slowly get faded out. It's harder to kind of get access to cadaver labs now. So if you haven't got access to a cadaver lab for whatever reason, this is probably the next best thing. So we're going to be looking at the scalenes. And this is a group of muscles. There's actually three kind of scalenes within the group. So we have the anterior scalenes. So these ones are more on the front of the neck. Then we have the medius scalenes. So they're kind of in the middle, right along the kind of the midline. And then you have the posterior scalenes here. So they are three individual muscles that create the muscle group, the scalenes. Okay. So let's take them one at a time. So if we look at the anterior scalenes, we start with, if we go over to info here, give it a second to generate info. Here we go. So origin, anterior tubercles of the transverse process of C3 to C6. So if we zoom in, so this is the cervical vertebrae. Okay, and this is the anterior portion of the transverse process. And the tubercle, think like a tube, there's like a little roundness there. You can kind of see here on the other side. This is where the tendon will attach here. So typically when a tendon attaches to the bone, there's usually a rough spot or a prominent spot. It gives the tendon something to grab onto. So we have C3 to 6. So this will be C3 here. Third cervical vertebrae, then fourth cervical vertebrae, fifth cervical vertebrae, and then sixth cervical vertebrae. So remember, there are 7 vertebrae in the neck. So here, and then we've got these ones up here, C2 and C1. Now, and then it goes down onto the, if we look at the insertion, the scalene tubercle of the first rib. So it's going to sit on the first rib. So just below your collarbone on the inside. So it kind of comes on the inside of the collarbone here. And this area is a really sensitive spot for people, as you'll find out when we look at the nerves that are kind of coming out of this area here. So it attaches onto the first rib. Then if we look at the medial one, so origin is a transverse process of C2 to C7. So it goes up that one level higher into C2. So right on the edge of the transverse process. So the transverse processes are these kind of wings that kind of come out of the vertebrae. And here you'll have a lot of muscle attachments coming out of the wings here. Also here you've got the cervical foramen. So that here you've got the arteries coming down through here. So there's little holes there where the arteries come down. It must mean it's very important. It's going to be protected. Okay, so keep that in mind as well. Then, so C7, where origin, C2 to C7. So right down to C7. So we're looking here. So 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. And then we have the posterior scalene group, which goes on to the second rib. Yeah. And going on to second rib, we are looking at here C4 to C6. So more kind of in the middle of the neck. So C4, 5, and 6. So when you look at the three together, they essentially go from C2 right down to C7, attaching on rib 1 and rib 2. The medial one definitely attaching on rib 2 there. And you can kind of look at them, they're thin, but they're quite thick muscles. And the fiber direction is kind of this kind of longitudinal direction. So that's important when you look at fiber direction, like the way the fibers are directed, because muscles contract, they cross bridge or slide across each other. So that creates the pulling movement. So when these muscles contract, they're either going to pull on the neck down this way or going to pull on the rib up this way, or both at the same time. And when we look at the movement, you'll see how that works. Okay, so let's look at the movement. So we go to motion. And we'll start the anterior scalenes here. So we have anterior scalene cervical spinal flexion, cervical spine rotation, and cervical spine lateral flexion. So we have three movements that this one does here. So you can kind of work it out because it's slightly on the front and the insertions on the ribs on the front. So when this muscle pulls here, it's going to create this chin to chest, this flexion of the neck. So you can kind of work that out. And also then if the first rib is kind of stable or fixed, then it's going to pull to the side. So you're going to get flexion, and you're also going to get a little bit of lateral flexion. And then because it's on the side and the kind of the pivot point of the rotation is going right down the middle here, it's going to create a turning or a rotation as well. So let's have a look at those. So let's look at scalene cervical flexion. So nodding forward. So we've got some big muscles in here as well. So if we this one here is the sternocleidomastoid, and we'll do a whole video on that bad boy together. But so if we get rid of everything else, go fade all. So we're really looking here at this one here, the anterior scalene. Perfect. So it's chin to chest. So that's flexion of the cervical spine, neck flexion. And I was talking earlier at the video of co-contraction. So if you add in the sternocleidomastoid, this big one here, plus the scalenes, that would be a co-contraction. So multiple muscles creating the same movement together. Okay. So that's cervical flexion, chin to chest. And then we go cervical rotation. So we've got the turning movement. So looking around over your shoulder. So here, so again, we've got some big muscles. We've got the sternocleidomastoid coming in here, and on the posterior aspect here, we've got some of the cervical extensors coming up through the back of the neck here as well, which we'll do in another video too. So these are the contracting muscles I'm referring to. Now, interestingly enough here, if we fade away, you would think that the rotation to the right would be the anterior scalenes, but it's more these kind of the left ones here, because they're more on the front. It's going to pull down on these fronts here and kind of rotate those C3, C4 segments particularly. So that's where you're getting that rotation from the other side, which is interesting. But when we look at the posterior scalenes, you'll see it flips over, and then the rotation's on the same side. And we flip down through here. And then we've got lateral flexion. So let's fade away everything else. So lateral flexion here, going straight ear to shoulder. So you're going to get that nice lateral flexion. And of course, you're going to get the upper traps here, really huge muscle, and sternocleidomastoid kicking in. So you've got some really big upper shoulder neck muscles that are involved in neck movement. And neck is probably one of the most overlooked regions of the body. And it's a real shame because you've got such some very, very sensitive structures coming down through the neck here. And when you get your neck strong and functional, it frees up this whole region. And because you've got some really important neurovascular bundles coming down through here, that frees up the entire neck shoulder complex particularly. And also it can kind of have an effect on just how your nervous system is operating in terms of being in good homeostatic balance or a little bit too sympathetically stimulated because you're getting compression on the nerves. we'll look at that in a second. Okay, so that's the anterior part. Let's look at the medial part of motion. So if it's just purely the medial part, we fade all, because it's literally right on the side of the transverse processes of the cervical vertebrae, and it's attaching pretty much directly in that line. So the medial scalenes are really a lateral flexor. It's going to ear to shoulder, ear to shoulder. In through there, all those. Now the medial ones, remember, go from C2 to C7. So it's a big kind of threading on the side of the neck. And so they're going to pull down on your side of your neck there. And you can see all the other muscles here that I've put fade all on that's involved in this movement. So it's a very, very busy area, lots of very small, fine muscles that are affecting this whole region through here. So again, it's another reason we want to do a lot of work on it. I have a whole Qigong Shaolin stretching training series that I've learnt, which is amazing for it. It's part of the bone marrow cleanse, if you know what Qigong is. And it's really just the first part is structured stretching, where you spend probably a good half an hour just taking your neck and shoulders through all the range of movement, slow, deep breathing, really concentrating on your respiration. By the end of it, you have a really flexible, mobile neck and shoulders, which is important for breathing work and meditation practices, and you feel really calm and relaxed and focused. It's a great practice, and that builds onto some other deeper, more progressive kind of Qigong movements. I'm a huge fan of Qigong. We've been practicing it for 20 years. Great to see it starting to become more mainstream, more popular. It's a really valuable practice. Okay, let's look at the posterior vertebrae. So we've got the posterior scalenes. So attaching on the transverse process again, going to the second rib. And so it's because it's behind, it's going to probably kind of pull you into a bit of extension, I'm going to guess here as well, and rotation. Let's see what the movement piece says. So lateral flexion, fatal. Here we go. So you can see here. Posterior scalenes, spine lateral flexion. Now, I suspect this is a bit of a mistake, because the spine's going into lateral flexion this way. So really it should be this side that's contracting to pull that in. This is eccentrically lengthening through here. So I'm not quite sure why they've got it eccentrically lengthening where it should be on this side concentrically lengthening. If anyone knows the reason for that, any kind of anatomy nerds in the comments, let me know. I'd be really curious to find out, because typically it'd be the contracting muscle here pulling your head to lateral flexion. Here it's lengthening. So that might be just a bit of an error, or they know something that I don't know. So one really cool thing about anatomy and physiology is it's a never-ending pit of learning. So I'm currently doing my PhD, and the amount of learning I'm doing, I'm studying kind of a lot of breathing, respiratory kind of stuff, is immense. So when you're studying anatomy and physiology, you want to have an open mindset, a beginner's mindset always, because when you learn something, then as you go to the next level, it opens up another kind of level of understanding that you're going to need to do more research to kind of make sense of it. So if you have a really fixed, I'm going to learn it's going to be exactly this, particularly with anatomy and physiology, there aren't really any absolutes. There are always outliers, variables, lots of different kind of factors that come into play to kind of change what happens. So having a really kind of open mind, beginner's mindset is really, really valuable in anatomy and physiology when you're kind of learning it, because if you the time you think you got it figured out, then a client will present with you and they'll have a slightly different presentation, and if you have that fixed mindset, you'll get stuck and you won't be able to figure it out. Okay, so this is a good example. So I'm not quite sure why this is presented like this. I'm sure there's a reason for it, but if you do know, let me know. Now, I did say this might create extension. Now, what you'll see often happen is that when people get a forward head carriage or forward head posture, so where the whole head kind of comes forward, so a lot of that kind of device neck, people looking like at computers or at mobile phones, the head gets a little bit kind of more forward position. So when this muscle contracts, because it's kind of, if you think about the pivot point is really C1, C2, where the C1 vertebrae sits on. So if the muscle attachment is behind the pivot point, when it contracts, it's going to pull the head back into extension. So this one can, depending on how you position the head, it can change its position to being a lateral flexor or even potentially an extensor. Okay. And there will be some rotation there as well because it's slightly behind the axis of rotation. It'll create a turning movement as well. Okay. So they're all going to be combined in that turning movement. Now, again, see all these muscles here that are involved in this movement here. Now, the big ones here, we've got the upper traps. Where we find those? Scalenes, transverse part of trapezius. Where's upper trapezius? I'm looking for it in the list. Descending part of trapezius left. There we go. So this huge muscle here, the traps, which we've done a video on the trapezius already. So that they're going to be creating lateral flexion, rotation, and extension as well. So that's another co-contracting muscle with the scalenes. Now these ones are huge, so they'll always take over the small ones because they're so small. Look at the size of that little one to these ones here. But you got to factor in too that all the muscles working together. So it's quite a busy area. And as you develop your neck and shoulders with exercise, stretching and strengthening, so you always want to stretch and strengthen, don't just stretch tissue. Stretching on its own typically doesn't work very well because you can't generate a lot of force into the tissue. So, and then the muscle won't adapt to the force. You can get some force. Weighted mobility or weighted stretching is really, really good, but just kind of passive stretching where you're just kind of like stretching the tissue out. There's no neural drive, so you're no contracting, relaxing the muscles while you're stretching. It's good for other reasons, but in terms of strengthening and creating that real more functional kind of movement, it's not the best. It's not the best. So you want to kind of add some kind of neural drive into your exercise. So for example, if I come back here, if you're trying to strengthen your scalenes, essentially they're all lateral flexors, all right? The three of them are lateral flexors, so they go that way. So if we're going to try to stretch the right side, you're going to bring your right ear to your right shoulder, so right ear to right shoulder, and that's going to open up the left side. So if I want to strengthen them, okay, what I want to do is go the other way. Okay, so left ear to left shoulder, that will lengthen them, so that'll create the stretch. And then when you bring it back to the middle, that muscle's going to contract. So if you bring your hand over the top, engage the stretch, and then you push your head that way and resist a little bit, you'll get a PNF contraction. So PNF stands for proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. So it's where the muscle contracts, sends a neural signal into the spine, and then it sends another signal back to its opposite muscle groups to relax them. Okay, so but you're also then getting another signal into the tissue saying contract in that position. So here, so that's contracting in its long position. And so you want a muscle to be able to lengthen and contract in its long position so it's got enough strength to hold at the end range. Okay, and that's really one of the goals when you're trying to rehab joints or muscles. You want strength at the end range. You don't strength here at the start range is good at really early stages, like isometric strength at the early stage, but you want to progress into full range of movement strength and flexibility. So adding in kind of contract relax is a great way to increase neural drive and activate tissue and release tissue neurologically. But at some point, you want to be doing some kind of neck strength exercises. And typically, you don't need to really focus on those ones specifically. If you do any kind of like pressing work, pushing work, pulling work, overhead pulling, so your standard kind of push, pull, overhead press, overhead pull down, they all incorporate the neck work. Okay, so if you're doing it with good technique, you will build up functional necks just from doing that as well. So you don't need to like spend too much time trying to isolate these scalenes with specific exercises. If you're doing your weight training correctly, or your yoga training correctly, your Pilates, core training correctly with good body awareness, position, alignment, you will get these smaller muscles starting to kind of fire up on their own. Particularly yoga is amazing because yoga involves a lot of rotation and twisting in the spine, done with the breath particularly. So it can be a really, really great way of developing up your neck if you follow the breath. If you don't follow the breath, you just try to jam yourself around, things get jammed up. It's not fun. Now, one of the key things I wanted to show with this was also is this kind of the brachial plexus. So let me whack that in. Brachial plexus. Okay, and I go on the right side. So the brachial plexus is a bunch of nerves that come out of the side of the neck. Okay, and they go underneath your collarbone, between your collarbone and the ribs. So between that space, between the clavicle, collarbone, and the ribs. Okay, and kind of into your armpit on the front of the shoulder. So they kind of go out of the neck, underneath the collarbone, okay, and then kind of down where your pecs are, underneath your armpit in the axilla region. This is why this area is really sensitive to a lot of people. And then the arms spread out and you go into like your radial nerve, your medial nerve, and your ulnar nerve. It's like your big arm nerves per se, and they thread right down through here. So for example, this nerve here is the median nerve. Okay, and this is the carpal tunnel nerve. So a lot of people who have carpal tunnel will have some kind of compression on this nerve, and a big area where it gets tight or compressed is scalenes. So you tight neck, muscles get really tight. Maybe you'll do a lot of computer-based work, a lot of driving, and you have a slightly forward head posture. That slightly forward head posture activates these muscles. They become short and tight. And then because they're on all the time, they get a bit more hypertrophied. And then the space where these nerves are coming out from the side of your neck gets compromised. And essentially what happens is these brachial plexus, these big nerves that are coming out of the side of the neck, get compressed by the muscles because they're too tight. And then that gives you like a pins and needles type feeling coming down your arm. And depending on which nerve is compressed, it'll either go kind of like to your thumb, kind of into your palm, or into your little finger side, depending which side it is. Okay. So I've helped a few clients who were scheduled to have carpal tunnel surgery. So where they release the kind of the fascia of the carpals through here. Where the issue wasn't so much the wrist, it was coming from a really, really tight neck and very tight pec minor, chest, that slight shoulder forward posture. So shoulder protracted, internally rotated, and depressed down. So that classic kind of inly rotated shoulder position. And so you get a double compression. You get compression in the neck from the scalenes, and then you get compression from tight chest muscles, pec major, pec minor particularly. So if let me put those in there so you can get a bit of visual of it. Okay, let's put in pec minor. Minor, right. Pec minor here. And you can see if pec minor gets tight, okay, it's going to pull this shoulder forward and down because of this line of pull of the muscle. So when this muscle contracts, it's going to pull the coracoid process of your shoulder blade forward and down. So again, that limits the space of the nerve coming through here. And you add that into tight scalenes and tight trapezius on the neck, and a slight forward head carriage, you're going to get double compression here and here. So that's going to compromise all this region here. So your delts, all of your rotator cuff muscles are going to get compromised. You can see the nerves threading in here. That'll be the supraspinatus nerve. Infraspinatus nerve there. So posture matters a lot. Alignment matters a lot. Functional movement matters a lot. And a lot of elbow wrist issues are really kind of related to this region up here, and that's related to how people can use their shoulder scapular movement properly. That's why I spend a lot of time teaching people how to use their shoulder blades correctly. Because if you don't know how to use your shoulder blades correctly, everything can get like jammed up and locked up, and it's not a fun time for everybody. This is also a reason why you want to get regular massage therapy. So a good remedial massage therapist, physiotherapy, osteopathy, chiropractic are really really well trained in releasing these muscles and these tissues. They all have slightly different approaches and different methods and techniques, but essentially what they're doing is just freeing up all these structures so that one, the spinal cord can communicate to the muscles via the nervous system. So think about nerves as like a communication or phone lines, like they're the lines of communication where the body is communicating to the brain and the brain is communicating to the body. And any interruption in the communication network, as in the nervous system, then that signaling gets interfered with, and it can kind of either create too much activation, so too much neural activity, too much tension, too much contraction, or not relaxing, so the muscles don't relax enough because they're always getting stimulated to contract and to fire. So you want to just be aware of that. So spending a lot of time in this region is really, really, really valuable, very valuable. The other area I want to show you is the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is your 10th cranial nerve. And it comes out of the skull, a little hole up here, a little foramen through here. Big nerve, threads down the anterior side of the neck, just in front of the transverse processes and in front of your scalenes here. And goes down the front of the vertebrae. And the vagus nerve is that kind of nerve that connects to all your vital organs. So it's going to connect to the lungs, the heart, the liver, the spleen, the stomach, the kidneys, the bladder, and it's the communication organ to tell the organs when they can rest, when they can heal, and when they can increase their function, their vital functions, or when other tissues in the body are more active and the sympathetic nervous system is more dominant. So heart rate increases, blood flow increases, things like that. So you have this kind of sympathetic, parasympathetic kind of balance. Now, if you have tight scalenes, that can potentially tension this muscle here and affect that signaling coming down through here. Okay. We want a vagus nerve to be really free so that there's no interruption of the communication coming up and down through this nerve. It is the key nerve to regulate your stress response, to regulate your organ function. It's the healing, restoration, primary communication nerve in the body. So anything that's going to compromise that is bad. Additionally, because it comes out of the base of the head here in this very small window, that's your ear hole there. That's where the ear comes out. So it's kind of just coming out below underneath your ear, between the jaw and the ear under there. So you can thread right up in there. Sometimes people just massage their earlobe just to stimulate the vagus nerve a little bit. If this area here gets compromised because these scalenes are tight and they're pulling down, and that creates a little bit of extension, so that closes the space down through here, that can also compromise the nerve through there. So we want to make sure that our scalenes are really happy and free. And I really recommend that you do a regular neck and shoulder stretching, mobility, and strengthening routine in whatever program you've got. So that could be something like I mentioned before, like a full, like me personally, I do a full, probably 45-minute practice once a week of just freeing up this area. And I practice Qigong and yoga and Tai Chi a lot. So they typically keep that in good stead. I do 2 strength training sessions a week personally to kind of have that strength training, and I do 2 cardio sessions a week. So I have that kind of balance of cardio, good VO2 max. Once you get a good VO2 max, you want to maintain it. So I do that on a bike. I do strength training, functional strength training. It's a mix of kettlebell training, dumbbells, barbells, all major muscle groups, all movement patterns. Training for movement. I'm not really training for muscular hypertrophy or anything like that. I'm just training for health. And then that mobility, flexibility, stability kind of piece as well, which is where the yoga and stretching and Pilates and Qigong and Tai Chi kind of come into it. Do all that with very mindful breath awareness, and you create a really healthy, functional, robust body, which is kind of the goal. So just doing one on its own, in my opinion, is good, but not enough. You want robust cardiovascular system, so good VO2 max, so cardio. You want good muscular strength because you want to maintain good bone health and muscular mass, which is really great for your metabolism and for your skeletal structure, particularly as you get older. And then also you want all the joints to be able to move freely through their full range. So that's mobility. You want enough strength to control the movement. That's stability. And you want all that wrapped together in a nice kind of bow. So when I'm coaching my clients, that's the approach I take. We do long-term programming where we basically build up this kind of function. We get everything working properly, and then we slowly layer on fitness onto that. And depending on what they do in their life, we then move into like high performance work. But if things aren't working well, if things are jammed up due to tightness, poor position, poor alignment, poor postural habits, not doing the body maintenance work, and you get neural compression and tightness, essentially this is like sciatica in your neck and shoulders. That pain is a limitation that stops you performing, stops you working in, and it's a real distraction. Okay, so that's the scalenes. We looked at the brachial plexus and the vagus nerve. If you like this video, do me a favor, like and subscribe to the channel. Great to kind of keep growing the channel and share the knowledge. If you have any questions or comments, love to hear your questions and comments. Please put them down, and we'll see you in the next video, and we'll continue looking at some of these other cervical extensors in the back of the neck in our next one. Okay, till then, stay healthy, stay fit, stay strong, and breathe, and we'll see you in the next one.